He breathed the music of Satie, the poetry of Verlaine, Baudelaire. He was called a daring genius of color. Born in 1916, there were some that knew him.
He was just there in his studio, and I saw him draw and paint a few things, and you had the impression that was so easy, so natural, and then he was so happy, just like a kid, just like a child.
The beauty for him was flowers and the smile of a child.
He was very shy. You have to be very shy to ask a priest to call a girlfriend.
I think that he discovered his kind of artistic destiny when, like any other boys or girls, making drawings at school. But at home, no one was so much interested in art or in painting. And then he was in the attics, you see, making his own drawings and developing his own world, really. And I think he did it all his life. He was always in the attic of some place, you see, in the attic maybe of his own imagination.
C'est mon avenir! Ouais, mais je pourrais pas te soutenir toute ma vie, mon petit. Hein? J'en ai pas besoin de ton argent.
Defiant.
Salut!
Often at odds with the world. Unknown to many, Jean-Philippe Dallaire, his story. An 18th century French folktale speaks of the world of Cadet-Roussel, a character qui avait trois maisons, who had three houses. Jean Dallaire had one foot in Canada, the other in France when he painted this in 1954. Cadet-Roussel, a man with childlike curiosity and wonder. Were artist and subject one? The region of the nation's capital, the Depression of the 30s.
In Ottawa, there was a circle around what's called Le Caveau, where not just painters, but writers, dancers, musicians, actors were meeting. So for him, that was a kind of confirmation that there was another world, another dimension. Dallaire was painting some portraits, and he made the portrait of a chômeur, a person without work, a certain father, a Dominican father by the name of Father Lévesque. Saw that portrait.
The first time I met him, it was in 1935, if I remember well. I went to Gallery Dufort on Rideau Street in Ottawa, and I saw some paintings which impressed me very, very much, especially the portrait of a young man of Hull, waiting for a job and standing on the street. And I asked the director of the gallery, who is the author of that painting? He told me, the young man who is there.
You painted that picture over there?
Yeah.
It's extraordinary, you know. You really have a talent there.
I'm very much interested in your work, and I would be ready to help you as much as I can. I can offer you something, your meals, and a place where you could work, and I can buy you all the materials you need. And he said, I don't want to become a monk. I'm not interested.
A contemporary, Jean-Paul Lemieux said of Dallaire that he drew like Raphael. But if expression was his heaven, his hell from early on was alcohol addiction. After leaving home, Dallaire's work became a ticket to survival, bartering art for sustenance. 1 year later, the Lévesque encounter took on a new meaning when, by chance, artist and priest were to meet again. A new chapter opened. Accepting Lévesque's offer of earlier, the next year saw the Dominican monastery on Empress Street in Ottawa become a refuge, a spawning ground, a place to nurture ideas and direction.
When Dallaire was 15 or 18 or 20 years old, there was an art school in Canada that was a group of 7. But he's not at all interested by this group or impressed by or attracted by this group. I think that when he was young, there was already in Dallaire his own sense of a destiny. I have my own path to follow.
Poisson et Verveux, 1949. The father-son rapport between Lévesque and Dallaire would span a lifetime. Paying for his sojourn by executing works for the monastic order, religious themes offered little scope. However, angels in varying forms would, from then on, reappear in his work. The Caveau art scene, authored by another Dominican, Raymond-Marie Voyer, was a forum for regional artists. Yet Dallaire, by following his own path, rejected dogma and conformity. He chose instead to explore universal worlds that were partly truth, partly fiction.
His inside was an extraordinary world. His dreams were not so nice. Most of the time he was dreaming about monstrous things. And when he was telling me the stories of those dreams, he was always laughing, not smiling, laughing.
Homme à la mandoline, 1950. La touriste anglaise, 61, and in 1957, Julie. Throughout his career, Dallaire reflected a humor while extrapolating from ideas as varied as tapestry, religion, folklore. His output was as eclectic as it was immense. It was in the Empress Street period that Dallaire met Robert Lapalme, a caricature artist then employed by Ottawa's Le Droit newspaper. His horizon broadened.
Dallaire was deeply impressed by the way of drawing of Lapalme. And he just got an idea from this and developed his own painting, making especially 2 portraits, one self-portrait and one portrait of his girlfriend by the name of Marie-Thérèse, with some influence with the Cubist movement and the surrealist dimension too.
He asked me to accompany my brother, and that's why I went to see his paintings. He talked to us, but he painted at the same time.
And this is my sister, Marie-Thérèse.
Miss?
And he continued smoking all the time, and he didn't look at me. I thought that I wasn't interesting enough.
Cigarette, maybe?
3 days later, a priest called me, a Dominican priest, if I wanted to receive Jean Dallaire, that he would like to come and see me.
Le Peintre Maudit, The Damn Painter, 1954. Dallaire craved bigger spaces to grow. He dreamed of France. Armed with a grant to study there, his meeting Marie-Thérèse Ayotte in 1938 cemented a direction.
The third time he came home, he asked me to marry him. And I thought he was joking. I thought it was very funny. And I just laughed with him. I just said, okay, we get married.
The wife was supposed to be a kind of an angel who was supposed to protect the young devil Dallaire, you see, from the bottle. But there are more cafes and bars in France than there are in Ottawa, especially at that time. So the angel had quite a hell of a job, you see, to protect the new husband.
We rent a house in the Quartier Latin. It was exciting. It was very new for myself.
A coffee for Madame.
I always thought that he loved me very much, but he was so surprising. One day he was one way, and the other day was the contrary.
He was going in some studios, ateliers, schools, and so on, and making his own discoveries of his own genius. I would say that all the opus of Dallaire is a kind of a very large and deep inscape. He is plunging in himself, you see, and this is the root of his art. And when we speak of influences about Dallaire, it's quite touchy, I think, this question, because there are no real influences. He is looking at other things, but he is just feeding on this. He just catch what is good for him and develop his own way.
So, what do you think?
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, real nice.
J'y suis, j'y reste. I'm here, I'm staying, was Dallaire's response to demands to return to Canada, despite headlines that forewarned of a Nazi invasion. Then,
He was arrested in November, and I was arrested in December. But we were not in the same camp.
So, is there something?
Full, Herr General.
as a Canadian citizen, British subject, incarceration for Dallaire was a world gone mad.
I think that Dallaire was deeply disturbed by these 4 years spent at the Saint-Denis camp. That was living through deep absurdity. When we think about this thing that all these prisoners were having around their arms, you see, and it was written there, 41, 42, 43, and 4, and it was always going for a century, for 1,000 years, you don't know. Out of time, I would say. And this is another dimension in Dallaire's work. We don't feel so much the time. He is out of the time, and I would say that he is too, and his work especially is out of space. That's the reason I would say that Dallaire is no specific Quebec painter or no specific Canadian painter. He's just a painter developing his own space and time and aesthetic and world, really.
Can you turn to me, please?
La Libération, The Liberation, 1944. Reading prolifically, learning languages, Dallaire forever demanded betterment. Forced to return home on his release, with the influence of l'évêque, Dallaire, always the rebel, found himself teaching at the conservative L'École des Beaux-Arts in Quebec City.
At 10:30 in the morning, we had it's break time, you see. Go outside, take fresh air. We were a couple of 100 feet from a tavern. So, go to the tavern, hiding from the windows of Mr. Jean-Baptiste, the director, and take one beer, and 2 beers, and 3 beers.
Look the line.
I remember a professor that told us once, he took a pin on the ceiling, hang a rope. He said, now you take your pencil, you draw that rope. So, well, when will it be finished? He said, when I'll blow, and if it moves on your sheet, it's finished. So that was a type of drawing that we were doing, copying things. And Dallaire arrived in that. He knew we had to do it, but he couldn't care. With Dallaire, he tells you, do you like it? Is that what you wanted to do? If it's yes, okay, it's okay, do it.
During this Quebec period, he was developing some very strong dimension in his painting. In size, he was making a few large canvases and one very big mural, if I remember well. It is something like 40 foot long. You see, that's a very huge painting that was made specially for a new insurance building. And there was another important thing that happened when during this Quebec period. Was a fascination in Dallaire's mind with tapestry, and especially about the tapestry with the name of Jean Lursa, who was a very big name at that time in France and kind of an international reputation. So the Quebec City period was, I think, quite a strong and high period for the production of Dallaire. And the series of the allegories of the arts that were made for the School of Fine Arts and that are now in the Quebec Museum collections are, I think, kind of the best production of all his career.
How could an artistic Quebec mind live in a very microculture, be exposed in a culture of France where everything's booming, the international renommee is there, and he managed to go on and keep his way and keep his boat still in the axe he wants to go. You have to be quite a strong fellow to go through that.
Oh, he was very satiric, not only about life, but also about people. He was not only a good painter, but a very good cartoonist.
Qu'il y a des roussels à 3 maisons, qu'il y a des roussels à 3 maisons.
Ousted from Beaux-Arts, Dallaire, now illustrator for the National Film Board, gave life to Cadet Roussel.
Well, I was always very proud of his painting, even if I was furious sometimes about him, the way he lived. But his painting, I never had a doubt that he was a great painter. He had an extreme talent.
Ah, mais vraiment, qu'il y a des roussels et bon enfant.
In 1958, diagnosed with a fatal illness, the father of 2 boys left his family to return to France.
He wanted me to go with the children, but we didn't have any money. And I knew that in France he couldn't earn any money. He just followed his star. Because he had the star, he was following.
he was living in a very small room, painting in this room, sleeping in this room, eating not so much because it was quite impossible for him to eat. And then there was a kind of a paradox because the only way for him to stay alive was, well, to drink. And he was drinking beer and wine and trying to get some nourishment from this.
What happened there was one of the greatest moments of my life, me and Dallaire, my wife. Dallaire opens the door. He has a lumberjack coat on. This was a very powerful shock and a good shock for me because at that instinct, at that moment, I realized this guy had always a foot in this continent. He had like 30 paintings off and on around the room. There were all kinds of allegoric paintings that seemed to be inspired from the folklore of the village stories. There is elements that you can find and you can retrace, like roosters on roofs, the village cross, religious symbols, very, very synthesized symbols.
What did Dallaire give us? He gave us life, he gave us sunshine, he gave us laughter.
The story has it that the child in all of us, Cadet Roussel, forever lives in expression. Jean Dallaire died November 27, 1965.
In his diary, he called me his benefactor, mon bienfaiteur, my father, spiritual father. It's one of the most important persons I have met in my life. He changed, importantly, my approach of life.
Well, he convinced me that you have to live your passions. You have to live your ideals, you have to go through with it and make it. Whatever it takes time, if it takes 10, 15, 20 years, you have to go through it and do it.
Dallaire was all through his life a child who was bearing his dream, his vision of a life without absurdity, with a life with its own signification, with a life with its own poetry, I would say. And for him, art was religion. For him, art was everything.
I remember one day he told me, "Do you know the name of my God?" I said, I could guess, but I will not dare say what I think. C'est la beauté, the beauty.